You know how every small town has that one place people whisper about? For us, it was Blackwood Forest. I grew up hearing all the urban legends about it, how people disappeared, how animals wouldn't go near the center, and how the trees seemed alive somehow. Honestly, I thought it was all just exaggerated campfire stories to scare the kids. Turns out they weren't lying. It started with a bet. My best friend Mark thought it'd be hilarious to see who could last the longest in Blackwood overnight. Stupid, right? I thought so too, but when he called me chicken in front of Sarah, the girl I had been crushing on forever, I couldn't back down. So there we were, armed with cheap flashlights, a backpack of snacks, and a whole lot of false confidence. The first hour wasn't so bad. The trees were tall and dense, sure, but it was just a forest. I remember laughing at how jumpy Mark got when an owl hooted above us. The trail, though narrow, was clear enough, and the moonlight filtered through the branches in silvery beams. Then we reached the clearing. That's when things started to feel off. It wasn't like the temperature dropped or anything dramatic. It was subtler. The air felt heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. Even the crickets, loud and obnoxious just moments ago, had gone silent. Do you hear that? Mark whispered, his voice unusually shaky. Hear what? I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. Exactly, he said. Nothing. No birds, no bugs, nothing. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out weak. Maybe they're just sleeping? Mark didn't respond. He just kept staring into the trees, his flashlight beam trembling slightly. We decided to set up camp there. I didn't want to admit it, but I didn't like the idea of wandering deeper into the woods in complete darkness. So, we unrolled our sleeping bags, cracked open some sodas, and tried to act normal. That's when we heard it. At first, it was faint, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze, but there was no breeze. The sound grew louder, closer, until it became clear. Footsteps. Probably a deer, I said, though my voice betrayed my unease. Mark shook his head. Too heavy for a deer. We shone our flashlights toward the sound, but the beams seemed to get swallowed by the darkness. And then, just as quickly as they started, the footsteps stopped. Mark stood up. Hello? He called out, his voice cracking. Silence, then a laugh. Not the kind of laugh you'd hear at a party or from a friend's joke. This was low, guttural, and so wrong it made my skin crawl. My legs felt like they were filled with lead, but my heart was pounding so fast it drowned out all rational thought. Mark and I just stared at the clearing in front of us, the same one we had sprinted away from not 5 minutes ago. No way, Mark whispered, his voice trembling. We were running in the opposite direction. How the hell are we back here? I don't know, I said, struggling to catch my breath. But we need to keep moving. Mark grabbed my arm, his grip almost painful. What if we can't? What if this forest... He stopped himself, shaking his head violently. Number, we'll find a way. We have to. His words didn't convince me, and I could tell they weren't convincing him either. The trees seemed closer now, their twisted branches reaching out like they wanted to drag us back. The air felt thicker, heavier, and that unsettling silence pressed down on us again. Even the sound of our own breathing felt muffled. We should try marking the trees, Mark suggested suddenly, fumbling through his backpack. He pulled out a small pocket knife and approached one of the larger trunks. If we end up in the same place again, we'll at least know. He carved a deep X into the bark, and we pressed on. For a while it seemed like we were making progress. The trail felt unfamiliar, the trees looked slightly different, and the oppressive feelings started to lift. But that glimmer of hope didn't last long. After about 15 minutes of walking, we found ourselves back at the same clearing again. And there, etched into one of the trees, was the X Mark had carved. Are you kidding me? Mark yelled, throwing his flashlight to the ground. It shattered, the bulb blinking out in an instant. This is impossible. This can't be happening. Keep it together, I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. I was just as freaked out as he was, but if we both lost it, we were dead. Or worse. The dragging sound returned. This time it was louder, closer. We spun around, our remaining flashlight beams darting wildly across the clearing. The figures were back, their impossibly long limbs silhouetted against the trees. There were more of them now, at least 6, and they were all pointing toward the center of the clearing. "We have to go," I shouted, grabbing Mark's arm and pulling him toward the trees. But he resisted, his feet rooted to the ground. "Wait," he said, his voice eerily calm. "What if they're trying to tell us something?" "What? Are you insane?" "They haven't heard us," he continued, his eyes locked on the figures. "They could have, but they didn't. What if—" He trailed off, his expression unreadable. "What if they're trying to warn us?" Before I could respond, one of the figures stepped forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette on invisible strings. It stopped a few feet from us and slowly raised its arm, pointing again to the center of the clearing. And then it spoke. "Bury it." The voice was the same horrible, distorted chorus as before, but this time the words were clear. Mark turned to me, his face pale but determined. "What if that's the way out?" "Bury what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark didn't answer. He was already moving toward the center of the clearing, his flashlight sweeping the ground. I followed reluctantly, my stomach twisting into knots. After a few minutes of searching, we found it, a small mound of earth, slightly raised and disturbingly out of place. Mark didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees and started digging with his hands, clawing at the dirt like a man possessed. I wanted to stop him, to tell him this was a terrible idea, but something about the mound felt wrong, like it didn't belong there, like it needed to be uncovered. After what felt like an eternity, Mark's hands hit something solid. He froze, then brushed away more dirt to reveal a small, weathered box. It looked ancient, its wood darkened with age and covered in strange symbols I didn't recognize. "What the hell is this?" Mark whispered, running his fingers over the carvings. Before I could respond, the figures began to move. They stepped closer, surrounding us completely, their long limbs swaying like they were caught in an invisible wind. "Bury it," they repeated, louder this time. Mark ignored them. He pried the box open, his curiosity overriding every ounce of fear. Inside was something wrapped in decayed, yellowed cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a small, blackened object that looked like a heart. It wasn't beating, but it radiated an unnatural warmth, and the air around it seemed to vibrate. The figures screamed. It wasn't a sound I can describe. It was raw, primal, and filled with a rage so intense it made my vision blur. "Put it back," I yelled, grabbing Mark's arm, but he just stared at the heart, his face twisted with a mix of awe and terror. "I can't," he said. I think this is what's keeping us here." The ground beneath us began to tremble, and the trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches clawing at the air. "Mark, we have to bury it." He hesitated, then nodded, dropping the heart back into the box and shoving it into the hole. We covered it as quickly as we could, our hands shaking so badly it was almost impossible to move the dirt. The moment the mound was covered again, the trembling stopped. The figures were gone. The forest was silent, but this time it felt natural. The oppressive weight had lifted, and when I looked up, I could see the stars through the trees. We didn't say a word as we made our way back to the edge of the forest. This time, the path was clear, and within minutes, we stumbled out onto the main road. Neither of us ever went back to Blackwood, but sometimes, late at night, I hear that laughter in my dreams, and I wonder What would have happened if we hadn't buried it?